You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium, available on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean and most other podcast platforms. Tonight's episode is about the Goiania Accident. So it's over to you now, Mark.
The Goiania Accident was a radioactive contamination incident that occurred on the 13th of September 1987 in Goiânia, Goiás, which is located in Brazil. The accident itself occurred after an unsecured radiotherapy source was stolen from the abandoned hospital site in Goiânia City. The unsecured radiotherapy source, which was subsequently handled by many hands following the examination of about 112,000 people for radioactive contamination, it was discovered that 249 of them were found to have actually been contaminated, which, as a consequence, finally resulted in 4 deaths. But the aftermath of the unsecured radiotherapy source didn't just stop there, as in the clean-up operation, topsoil had to be removed from several sites, all the objects from within the houses, including personal possessions, had to be seized and incinerated, and even several houses ended up having to be completely demolished. Eventually, and over some time of course, many of the radioactive substances were cleared away after being tested. However, a feeling of gloom still hung over the local residents, as not only were export products from Goiânia being banned by other countries, but citizens of Goiânia were asked by various local authorities for some sort of certification that stated that they were free of any radioactivity before they could travel. This, of course, caused a public outcry at the time, citing unjust discrimination. Time magazine has identified the incident, or the accident, as one of the world's worst nuclear disasters, and the International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA for short, called it one of the world's worst radiological incidents. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you for tuning in once again and listening to this radiation-filled episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a psychic medium, a ufologist and a true crime buff. And just to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every Monday night, though occasionally on a Tuesday and Wednesday if time allows, allowing for bank holidays and busy weekends, I do a podcast on the many wide and various subjects that fall under the Unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters, and all different sorts of paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime, and the many missing people that often go unnoticed. So if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the disaster that surrounded the Goiania Accident and this week's necessary disclaimer. This story is a tale that sadly involves people dying through radiation poisoning and misadventure, and so may prove upsetting to some. Therefore, listen at your own discretion. Also, all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts of the case remain. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, it has made me realise that the word 7 has the word even in it, which personally I find it to be odd. Anyway, let us get back to the story. According to Wikipedia, The city of Goiânia is the capital and largest of the Brazilian states of Goiás. It has a population of approximately 1,500,000 people, with it being the second largest city in the central west region of Brazil and the 10th largest in the country. Its geography is continuous with a few hills and lowlands, but with flat lands in most of its territory, especially the Meia Ponte River and the Botafogo and Capim Puba streams. I thought I'd get that right. Goiânia was founded as a planned city on the 24th of October 1933 by the then governor Pedro Ludovico to serve as a new state capital and administrative centre. The city of Goiânia itself is an important economic hub of the region and is considered a strategic centre for such areas as industry, medicine, fashion and even agriculture, with it having been previously described as having the largest green area per habitant in Brazil and the second most in the world after Edmonton, Alberta in Canada. And with its rapid population growth and urban expansion, satellite imagery shows that most of the green area is now at the periphery of its sprawling city limits, with its per capita green area claim probably needing a review. Some of Goiânia's most notable people are the footballer Tulio Moraviuhala, I think that's right, Olympic medalist swimmer Carlos Jaime, the actresses Carolina Ferraz and Ingrid Guimarães, I think that is, and for all my fellow crime buffs out there, it is also the home of serial killer and former security guard Tiago Henrico Gomes da Rocha, who has claimed to have killed at least 39 people. So, how did one of the world's radiological incidents start? Well, it all started when, back in 1985, the Instituto Goiânia de Radioterapia, or the IGR for short, which was a private radiotherapy institute in Goiânia and located approximately half a mile northwest of the city centre, moved to its new premises. However, when IGR did transfer to its new premises, it left behind a cesium-137-based teletherapy unit that they had originally purchased 8 years earlier in 1977. OK, for those of us who do not know what a cesium-137-based teletherapy unit is, here goes. A cesium-137 teletherapy unit is designed for treatment distances of between 10 to 30 centimetres from the surface of the skin and was manufactured circa 1959 by the Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, or the AECL for short, and installed in various hospitals, universities and institutions around the world that dealt with things like tumours and cancers. However, this particular machine was intended for the treatment of tumours which lie less than 5 centimetres below the skin. There you go, that was pretty straightforward, wasn't it?
If you say so.
Anyway, I continue. With the original site now lying abandoned, there were regularly ongoing issues between IGR and the then owner of the site, the Society of St Vincent de Paul, with its future eventually being disputed in court. And on the 11th of September 1986, the Court of Goiás finally stated that it had knowledge of the abandoned radioactive material left in the area. Four months before the theft of the cesium capsule, Sora Taniguchi, the then director of IBASCO, which was the Institute of Insurance for Civil Servants, used the police force to prevent one of the owners of IGR, a Carlos Bezeril, from removing any of the radioactive material that had been left behind. So in response to Sora Tanegusu's actions, Carlos Bezerra then warned the president of IPASGO, Mr. Licio Borges, that he, meaning Borges of course, should take responsibility and, I quote, for what would happen with the cesium bomb. So the court of Goiás then posted a security guard to protect the abandoned site. Meanwhile, the owners of IGR wrote several letters to the National Nuclear Energy Commission, or the CNEN for short, warning them about the danger of keeping a teletherapy unit at an abandoned site. Also informing them that they could not remove the equipment on their own once a court order prevented them from doing so. So there it stayed, alone and unloved. Fast forward a year, and on the 13th of September 1987, the security guard who was tasked with protecting the abandoned site, for whatever reason, did not show up for work that night. So, with no one keeping guard of the area, this was an ideal time for two, shall we call them opportunists? Yeah, I will. To enter the partially demolished IGR site illegally. Our opportunists, who were named Roberto dos Santos Alves and Wagner Mortel Piera, then partially disassembled the teletherapy unit and, well, what do you think happened next?
Did they drive off in a fast car?
No.
Did they load the disassembled part into a secure van and make a quick getaway in a good old Mission Impossible type style?
No.
Did they use an elaborate escape tunnel that the pair had been planning and digging, with every detail of their scheme being covered to the last fine point?
No. They took the source assembly part to Roberto's home in a wheelbarrow. The pair, figuring that they might get some scrap value for the unit, then began dismantling the equipment. However, it wasn't long, that evening in fact, before they both began vomiting due to radiation sickness. And the next day, Wagner Mortel Piera began to experience both diarrhea and dizziness, with his left hand beginning to swell, which later developed into a burn on his hand that was the same size and shape as the aperture or the lens from the secure assembly part that they dismantled, which then eventually led to the partial amputation of several of his fingers. 4 days later, on the 15th of September 1987, Wagner Mortel Piera decided to visit his local clinic where he was diagnosed with a foodborne illness and was told to return home and rest. A very quick, interesting side note before I go on. A foodborne illness, which is also known as foodborne disease, or more simply just food poisoning, is caused by consuming foods or beverages contaminated with harmful pathogens such as bacteria, viruses and parasites. Symptoms may include upset stomach, diarrhea, vomiting, fever, along with aches and pains. However, shall we call him a business colleague? Yeah, well, his business colleague, Roberto dos Santos Alves, being the industrious little beaver that he was, decided to continue with his efforts to dismantle the equipment and eventually free the cesium capsule from its protective rotating head. However, his enthusiasm for his work would soon put a boot in his backside when his prolonged exposure to the radioactive material led to his right forearm becoming ulcerated, which, approximately a month later, on the 14th of October, consequently required amputation. After this first short break, in part 2 we will look at what our two heroes did to open the cesium capsule from its protective rotating head and the continuing spread of the radioactive material throughout Goiânia.
This show is brought to you courtesy of Neil Packer and the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre. Find them online at www.hauntedresearchcentre.com or at 9 to 11 Regent Street, Hinckley, LE10 1AW. Open on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for guided tours of the haunted rooms at just £3 per person. Booking is essential at all times, and over 16s only, please, unless accompanied by an adult. The haunted rooms are extremely haunted, and paranormal activity could, and has, taken place at any time. Some areas and particular objects or items can be quite scary and unnerving. Membership is available for £25 to qualify for selective offers. And why not download the app, available on both iOS and Android, for only $3.99, to keep up to date with what is coming up at the centre.
So, let's go back a month before both of our heroes had their amputations, to the 16th of September 1987. Roberto dos Santos Alves, whilst trying to dismantle the cesium capsule, punctured the capsule's aperture window with, well, what do you think he used?
Was it a high-tech rotary drilling rig machine that conducts drilling operations to excavate the Earth's surface?
Nope.
Or a state-of-the-art air rotary drill that utilises compressed air or gas to remove any cuttings from a borehole?
No. He, in fact, used a screwdriver. Once Roberto Alves had made his hole, he noticed, whilst looking at it, that there was a deep blue light coming from the inside of the capsule. So he decided, by using the same screwdriver, of course, to try and scoop out some of the blue glowing substance. Having successfully spooned out some of this glowing substance, and thinking that it may be some sort of gunpowder, he then tried, although unsuccessfully I might add, to set light to it, because that's what you do with strange glowing substances, especially when they are blue in colour. But of course, I jest. I think it's worth me pointing out here that at the time of the incident, the International Atomic Energy Agency report claimed that the exact mechanism by which this blue glowing substance was generated was unknown. However, at a later date, it was thought that it could have been either an ionised air glow, fluorescence, or Cherenkov radiation that is associated with the absorption of moisture by the source. Yeah, it sounds a bit techie to me as well. On the 18th of September, Roberto Alves then went on to sell the item to a nearby scrapyard where, later that same night, the owner of the scrapyard, a Mr. Duver Alves Ferreira, also noticed the same blue glowing light coming from the punctured capsule. Thinking that the capsule's contents were either valuable or supernatural, Duver Ferreira immediately brought it into his home where, over the next 3 days, he thought it would be a great idea to invite his family and friends over to view the strange glowing object for themselves. Three days later, on the 21st of September, at the scrapyard, one of Duver Ferreira's friends decided to gather together a few rice-sized grains of the glowing substance from the capsule, where then they began to share some of these glowing grains with other various friends and family members, And consequently, due to this grain share-out, later that same day, de Ver Ferreira's wife, 37-year-old Maria Gabriela Ferreira, began to fall ill. On the 24th of September, de Ver's brother, Ivo Ferreira, managed to successfully scrape some of the additional dust from out of the cesium capsule and then took this sample over to his house a short distance away, where he then, for whatever reason, decided to spread some of this dust on the concrete floor of his home. His 6-year-old daughter, who was sitting on the same floor eating an egg sandwich at the time, was also fascinated by the blue glow of the powder, so much so that she started applying it to her body and showing it off to her mother, and as the egg sandwich was also exposed to the dust from the blue glowing powder, unfortunately due to this, his 6-year-old daughter quickly absorbed a fatal dose of radiation poisoning. 2 days later, on the 25th of September, de Ver Ferreira then sold the cesium capsule, or what he perceived as scrap metal, to a third scrapyard. De Ver Ferreira's wife, Maria Ferreira, was the first to notice that many people around her, meaning her family and friends of course, had become severely ill all at the same time. So on the 28th of September 1987, just 15 days after the capsule was found, she reclaimed the material from the rival scrapyard and transported it all to the hospital. The next morning, on the 29th of September, at the hospital, a visiting medical physicist used a scintillation counter to confirm the presence of radioactivity, and then he quickly persuaded the authorities to take immediate action, which meant that by the end of the same day, the city, the state, and the national governments were all aware of what was going on, with the news of the radiation incident being broadcast on local, national, and international media. Within days, nearly 130,000 people in Goiânia flooded local hospitals, concerned that they might have been exposed to the radiation, and out of those 130,000, through the use of a Geiger counter, it was discovered that 249 people were indeed found to be contaminated, with some having radioactive residue still on their skin, and with 20 people showing signs of radiation sickness and requiring immediate treatment. Before we go into the second break, I just want to take a brief look at this gadget called the Geiger counter. So, what is a Geiger counter and what are its origins? Well, according to Wikipedia, a Geiger counter, which is also known as a Geiger-Müller counter or a GM counter, is an electronic instrument used for detecting and measuring ionised radiation. It all started in 1908 when Hans Geiger, under the supervision of the New Zealand physicist Ernest Rutherford at the Victoria University of Manchester, developed an experimental technique for detecting alpha particles that would later be used to develop the Geiger-Müller tube in 1928. However, this early counter of the Geiger-Müller tube was only capable of detecting alpha particles, although it was part of a much larger experimental apparatus. And so it wasn't until 1928 that Hans Geiger and one of his PhD students, one Walter Müller, developed the sealed Geiger-Müller tube. This sealed Geiger-Müller tube was small and rugged, but not only could it detect alpha and beta radiation, as prior models had done before, it could also pick up gamma radiation. Now that the practical radiation instrument could be produced relatively cheaply, so the Geiger counter was born, with it achieving great popularity as a portable radiation detector, with most modern versions using halogen-quenched gases. And being in prominent use as a handheld radiation survey instrument, it is still widely used in applications such as radiation dosimetry, radiological protection, experimental physics, and the nuclear industry, and it is perhaps one of the world's best-known radiation detection instruments. After this second short break, in part 3, we will look at how the radiation affected the rest of the population in Goiânia during the clean-up operations and the long-term impact it had on the area, including the legal ramifications.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07 852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk. Or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights, ghost hunting events. Remember, only the original will do.
The clean-up operations for the Goiania incident was much harder than it could have been, mainly because the source of the radiation was opened, and the active material, meaning the blue-glowing substance, of course, was water-soluble in that it was completely able to dissolve in water. If the capsule had been sealed, it would only have needed to have been picked up, placed in a lead counter and transported to a radioactive waste storage facility. Usually in the recovery of lost radioactive sources, the International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA for short, recommends careful planning and, by using a crane or other device, placing a shield, usually a pallet of bricks or a concrete block, near the source to protect recovery workers. Isn't hindsight a wonderful thing? Just a pity it never lasts, really. All the houses that belonged to the contaminated families had to be completely emptied, and then the following procedure was carried out on all the vacant homes. All the objects from within those houses were examined for radioactivity. Vacuum cleaners had to be used to remove any radioactive dust from the homes. Plumbing was examined for any radiation. Painted surfaces would be scrapped. Floors were treated with acid and Prussian blue mixtures or ferricyanide salts. Roofs were vacuumed and hosed, with 2 of the houses having to have their roofs completely removed. topsoil had to be removed from several sites, and several houses had to be demolished. And as cesium, or for us laymen, I mean the blue glowing substance, as it has a high affinity for many clays, chemicals like potassium alum dissolved in hydrochloric acid were used on clay, concrete, soil and rooftops, along with waxed or greased floors and tables, with sodium hydroxide solutions followed by dissolved potassium alum being used to treat synthetic floors, machines and typewriters. The objects from the empty homes that were found to be free of any radioactivity were wrapped in plastic bags, while those that were contaminated were either decontaminated or disposed of as waste. I think it's only right for me to point out here that usually in industry the choice between decontaminating or disposing of objects is based on only the economic value of the item and the ease of decontamination. However, in this case, it seems that the International Atomic Energy Agency recognised that to reduce the psychological impact of the event, a greater effort should be taken to clean up items of personal value, such as jewellery and photographs. After the houses were emptied and the clean-up operation was over, the waste was then moved out of the city to a remote place for storage. In order to decontaminate many of the citizens of Goiânia, Prussian blue or ferricyanide salts were used to internally decontaminate many people, although unfortunately by the time it was applied, much of the radioactive material had already migrated from the bloodstream to the muscles tissue, which greatly hampered its effectiveness. Urine from the victims was treated with an ion exchange resin to compact the waste for ease of storage. On a short but interesting side note, mainly because I've already mentioned it twice, Prussian blue, also known as Berlin blue, Brandenburg blue, Parisian and Paris blue, is a dark blue pigment produced by oxidation of ferrocyanide salts. It has a variety of uses, but in medicine it is orally administered as an antidote for certain kinds of heavy metal poisoning and radioactive isotopes of cesium. Plus, it is on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines, with it being one of the most important medications needed in a basic health system. The radiation from the Goiania accident spread significant contamination throughout the Goiânia International Airport and the districts around Lisbon, which also included 3 buses, 42 houses, 14 cars, 5 pigs, and 50,000 rolls of toilet paper. Don't ask. In addition to a public civil action for damages to the environment that was brought in the September of 1995 by the Federal Public Prosecution Service, together with the State of Goi's own Public Prosecution Service, and before the 8th Federal Court of Goiânia, legal proceedings were brought against the Federal Union, the National Nuclear Energy Commission, the State of Goiás through its health department, the Social Security Institute for Civil Servants in the State of Goiás, meaning IPASGO again, or if you remember at the time of the accident, was the private owner of the land where IGR was originally located, the 4 medical doctors who owned IGR, and the clinic's physicist who was also the supervisor. And on the 17th of March 2000, the 8th Federal Court of Goiás ordered all of the previously mentioned defendants to pay compensation of $1.3 million, which is approximately $750,000 to the Defence of the Diffused Rights Fund, which is a federal fund for the compensation of damages to the environment, consumers, property and the rights of the artistic, historic or cultural value and other collective rights. However, the judge in his sentence excluded the state of Goiás and the federal union from paying any compensation.
But what of our two original opportunists? What happened to them?
That is a good question. Well, Roberto dos Santos Alves and his partner Wagner Morto Piera, although the two thieves were not included as defendants in the public civil suit, the judgment of the court did find them directly responsible for the accident, and if they had been arraigned as defendants, they certainly would have been convicted, as their actions led to a strict no-fault liability. However, in terms of criminal intent, as they were not aware of the seriousness of their actions by removing the cesium source from its location, they had no knowledge of the dangers of the radiological device, and there was no danger sign no danger sign erected in the abandoned clinic to ward off intruders. Small print, eh? Afterward, in total, about 112,000 people were examined for radioactive contamination, and out of these 112,000, 249 were found to have significant levels of radioactive material in or on their body. And in this group of 249, 129 of them had internal contamination, with a majority of these internally contaminated people only suffering small doses, corresponding to less than about 1 in 200 excess risks of developing cancer later in life. Also, out of the 249 contaminated people, there were 4 deaths. As of 2007, compensation was still being distributed to survivors of the Goiânia incident. The original teletherapy capsule was seized by the Brazilian military as soon as it was discovered, and since then the empty capsule has been on display at the School of Specialised Instruction in Rio de Janeiro as a memento to those who participated in the clean-up of the contaminated area.
Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 133, we are going to be looking at what happened to Snippy the horse. The mutilation of Snippy the horse was the death and dissection of a Colorado horse that was first widely reported on the 5th of October in 1967. Mainstream experts concluded the death was the result of natural causes, though sensationalised press and unsubstantiated folklore questioned whether the death and mutilation might be linked to satanic cults, intelligence operations, or even flying saucers. The skeletal remains of Snippy the horse is currently part of a UFO tourism attraction.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. Though the pronunciation of all the names, I apologise to anybody whose name I got it wrong, it was all mine. The actors in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes and Denise Poolar, with special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley. And of course a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast, but if you know of any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters and any other sort of paranormal phenomena, as well as true crime, unsolved crime and missing people, just drop me a direct message and I will see what I can do. I'll also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast as a thank you, if you want me to, of course. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. I thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. This show and all its contents are covered by basic copyright of Mark the Medium.